Hello and welcome to the JPEL Idea Handbook webinar series. I'm Sean Cole, professor at Harvard Business School and co-chair of JPEL's Idea Initiative. We've put together these webinars to accompany the release of our new handbook on using administrative data for research and evidence-based policy, which is funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. The handbook provides a series of technical guides as well as case studies on how to make administrative data more accessible for research. It's my pleasure today to introduce Moonhak Kim, who's presenting a chapter on the San Francisco SF-USD partnership, the development of data sharing structures and processes. The case study is about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, education. A team of 6 authors, including representatives from the San Francisco Unified School District and Stanford University, describe a research practice partnership data sharing arrangement which evolved organically from repeated interactions between academics at Stanford and the San Francisco School District. The project currently contains an archive snapshot of data from over 55,000 students, 3,500 teachers, and 10,000 staff from 2001 to present. Most impressively, it's updated on an ongoing basis as new data arrives. Data is housed at Stanford and supports 25 or more research projects each year. Putting this together involved a lot of work and required a lot of difficult and challenging decisions. The authors will discuss some of the key hurdles they faced and how they overcame them, including where to house the data and how to manage data use agreements. They'll discuss this work within the context of the 5 SAFE framework, which is common to many of the case studies in this chapter, ensuring safe projects, safe people, safe settings, safe data, and safe outputs. Our presenter today is Moonhak Kim, the Director of Research Practice Partnerships, Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley. Previously, he was the Supervisor of Analytics at SF-USD and served as the school district's point of contact for data exchanges. His co-authors are Jim Shen, Laura Wentworth, Norma Ming, Michelle Reiniger, and Eric Benger. With that, I invite you to listen to the presentation. Following the talk, we'll have a live question and answer session.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session of the webinar on the Stanford SF-USD Partnership, Development of Data Sharing Structures and Processes. Before I jump into our talk, I would like to thank the editors and the project support team for making this chapter and the handbook happen. And we thank you for all the support that you have offered us. And I would also like to recognize and acknowledge the co-authors of this chapter, some of whom are here with me today to answer some questions from the audience during the webinar. The other co-authors are Jim Shen at JPEL, Laura Wentworth at California Education Partners, Norma Ming at San Francisco Unified School District, Michelle Reiniger, now at University of Colorado at Boulder, and Eric Benger at Stanford University. This talk will build on the chapter that has been written, summarizing and highlighting some of the big picture and aspects of the chapter. But whenever appropriate, we'll go a little bit beyond to strengthen and enhance some of the points that we have made in the chapter as well. I'd like to start by sharing a story coming out of the partnership. This is a great picture of Bill Sanderson, who's the Assistant Superintendent in charge of high schools at San Francisco Unified School District, and Tom D on the right, who's a professor at Stanford University's Graduate School of Education. Together, they have carried out an analysis of ethnic studies, a pilot implementation of ethnic studies at San Francisco, and which was found to improve students' GPA and attendance significantly compared to similar students who are not enrolled in the course. It's a little bit hard to read in the picture on the slide, but Bill is pointing out and commenting on the importance of validating promising practices. Right? The district leaders identified ethnic studies course as potentially a useful way to improve student performance and outcomes. And this study that they carried out in partnership has validated such promising practices as deserving more attention. And Tom on the right is commenting about the importance of piloting, evaluating, and scaling. And he really appreciated the evidence-based leadership and research partnership that was implemented. So the findings of this study was used to support the broader scaling within San Francisco Unified School District to serve broader high school population. And the research was also cited to justify ethnic studies by other school districts and states, including the state of California. So this is an example of really partnership at work. So the goal in this talk is to share some of the broader aspects of the partnership between Stanford and SFUSD, as well as to talk a little bit more specifically about the data sharing infrastructure, which is a component of that partnership. Here's the outline for the talk today. The talk consists of 3 large sections. The first section will talk about a research practice partnership model for research, which is how Stanford and SFUSD collaborate together. The second component section of the talk will talk about the institutional setup of the partnership between the 2 entities. And then the last section, the final section, will conclude with some lessons and insights for the field. An RPP model for research. Coming from a forthcoming piece, a WT Grant white paper, I believe, by Farrell et al., they define RPPs as long-term collaborations to promote educational improvement and transformation through engagements with research that are intentionally organized to engage diverse perspectives. So this partnership model really brings both the practice side and the research side together with the explicit goal of engaging diverse perspectives and to improve educational outcomes for students and beyond. And this really is the underlying philosophy of how the partnership is structured and organized. Why might this be the case? So we might notice and observe that there is a disconnect between the research community on the one hand and the practice community on the other, which becomes a bigger issue if we start to think about not research production as the ultimate goal, meaning simply just doing and publishing research, but research use, right? So if we start to think about making changes in practice and or policy, right, this disconnect between the research community and the practice community starts to not be great, right? So if we're aiming to have greater impact, we might consider a different model, right? So overall, we're pushing for and striving for a stronger evidence-informed decision-making in the world of education. So how do we do this? We start with the acknowledgement that there are multiple forms of knowledge distributed across partners. Researchers, whom I'm going to just abbreviate as Rs for the rest of the talk, bring theoretical domain expertise and analytical expertise, right? So they come from the academic literature and they really know how to gather and analyze data. Practitioners, who are going to be abbreviated as Ps, bring practical domain expertise and contextual knowledge. And it is really the combination of both of these sets of knowledge that is going to lead to meaningful research and meaningful research use. Right? So coming from this perspective, data sharing infrastructure is an important component, but is only one component to facilitate the collaboration. What might the collaboration and the work across these distributed knowledge across partners look like? One example is that even the starting point of coming up with a research question is actually a balance. Practitioners bring their knowledge of problems of practice, right, the challenges that they face on the front lines of education. And researchers bring in their knowledge about the gaps in the literature, right? So what is known in the field, what is still yet to be found out. A second example might be that practitioners bring knowledge about the measures and study designs that are equitable and inclusive. Whereas researchers can contribute knowledge about the validity and reliability of measures and instruments that are used in research. And lastly, another way that work can be done with the distributed knowledge across partners is that practitioners bring the knowledge about the context of data collection. Researchers bring knowledge about how to analyze the data. And it is with both of them, researchers and practitioners working together, that they can work towards interpreting and making sense of the data together. Again, there are multiple forms of valid and useful research, right? So building on this idea that there are multiple forms and distributed sets of knowledge, right? We also acknowledge that there are multiple forms of valid and useful research. Right? Coming from this perspective, for practitioners, rigorous and useful research go beyond randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. Right? In SFUSD context, the district has done some RCTs through non-Stanford partnerships, but it's typically the constraint that is coming more from the practical and ethical considerations that have limited the number of RCTs done within the district, rather than any software or hardware or data infrastructure constraints that would limit the ability to carry out RCTs. All right. So what is the implication, right? So we have this partnership model of how the two entities collaborate together, but what might be the importance of this? So I've discussed this partnership model of collaborative knowledge sharing and working together in order to generate research that will also have greater impact and greater research use, right? That's one of the pieces that we're starting with. The second piece that we need to bring in is the importance of the data context at the school district. Right? School districts typically have decentralized and complex data ecosystem. That is sort of a complicated way to say that data systems are messy and numerous. Sometimes it's not too unusual to find every department having their own pet data systems that they have to procure to serve their needs, and then that proliferation leads to difficulty of integrating data across the district, and having to kind of work in this decentralized manner can be a challenge. So combining these two aspects, the partnership model of working together and the decentralized and complex data ecosystem, means that the work of data sharing is going to be always greater than simply data access. It's not the simple picture of where the school district simply gathers up the data, cleans it up, packages it into a nice database, and hands it over to researchers for them to carry out the work. Right? Data sharing really is a more iterative and complicated process, which the partnership model really supports well. So simply put, data sharing is not a simple, linear, and unidirectional process. Right. We can also think about the difference between the operations and analysis. Right? So operations are day-to-day work of the school district, whereas analysis is some steps removed. Analysis can be done internally within the school district or externally by evaluators and researchers. Right? But we have those two levels. There's a day-to-day work that is driven by one system, and we can think about analysis as kind of emerging from operations but separate from. Right? Of course, we have the data going back and forth, right, from operations data. In order to do research and analysis, there has to be some snapshot taken from the real-time flowing operations data to do sort of a freeze frame, right, to hand over to researchers and evaluators to do the analysis. And of course, there's another cycle coming back from analysis to operations, right? So once the analysis is done, right, some of those findings might need to find the way back to operations so that schools and teachers can integrate the insights and the findings and the results coming out of analysis and incorporate them into their work. A good example is some student level analysis, right, which comes out with some results about what level of support or services students might need. So researchers can carry out that analysis, right? But that data that's been generated in the analysis has to go back into operations and for teachers and school leaders to access. So we can have this internal circle about data flowing between operations and analysis. But an important thing to point out is that there is a broader outside circle that we need to think about. Okay? And that is the flow of knowledge. Right? So going from operations data to analytical data, it's the knowledge about the timing, the sampling, and other parameters of the snapshot, right? So it's the district staff that have the knowledge about this, and they work typically in conjunction with researchers to think about what the right parameters might be, what the helpful parameters for research might be. And on the opposite end, going from analysis to operations, of course, is the knowledge about how findings might map back to operations, right? So we can think about the continuous cycle of the data flowing between operations and analysis, and also the knowledge, the broader context in which different partners bring different knowledge into the process as well. Right. Let me go on to the second section of the talk today, which is about the institutional setup of the partnership, which will focus on the entities and the processes. So let me start with the entities. Broadly, the partnership consists of two main entities, San Francisco Unified School District on the left side and Stanford Graduate School of Education on the right. But of course, the picture gets a little bit more complex. The main entity within the school district is RPA, or Research Planning and Assessment, which is really the research and analysis division of the school district. And within that division, we have the chief of RPA, supervisor of research, and supervisor of analytics, really collaboratively handling the research partnership work with Stanford and beyond. And of course, it's not just RPA that's engaged in research, it's all administrators and practitioners that are carrying out in different departments and different divisions of the school district that work closely together with the staff of RPA as well as researchers to make research happen. On the Stanford side, of course, we also have the Center for Educational Policy Analysis, CEPA, right, which is the main entity within the GSC when it comes to the data sharing arrangement of the partnership. And the two main partners within CEPA are the data manager that handles the data sharing and the executive director that oversees the broader partnership and collaboration. And of course, just like at the school district, it's not just, the partnership doesn't just stop at CEPA, right? They're all researchers consisting of faculty members and graduate students that collaborate. And importantly, we have a third partner in this picture, which is the California Education Partners. And the partnership director that works within EdPartners, which is a third party, works closely with both the CEPA team and the RPA team. And when it comes to data sharing, the partnership director from EdPartners works closely with the supervisor of analytics at RPA and the data manager at CEPA to make this happen. An important piece of the data sharing infrastructure for the Stanford SFUSD partnership is this warehousing. We have always referred to it as a data warehouse, even though that might not be fully consistent with some of the technical usage of that term. The basic idea is that a bulk of the analytical data that's been captured at the school district periodically gets transferred to Stanford University to a data warehouse at CEPA, where researchers can then access depending on which variables and measures and time periods of data that they need. The warehousing process really consists of three layers. The foundational piece is the umbrella DUA, which is the overarching agreement among partner entities to transfer data from SFUSD to Stanford. And that agreement gets updated periodically to make sure that it's keeping up with any changes over time, especially in terms of any new or additional variables that should be contained in the DUA moving forward. The second layer of the warehousing process is the periodical cycles of data transfer. For student data, that is on an annual cycle, and for staff data, that is on a twice yearly cycle, biannual cycle of data transfer from San Francisco to Stanford. And then the last piece consists of some episodic transfers of other data, right? So data from mostly the decentralized parts of the district's data ecosystem, right? So data that are not necessarily centrally contained and managed. So coming from different departments and different systems tend to be collected separately and transferred on a slightly different timeline than the main transfers that happen on the second layer. So whereas the warehousing process simply is about the main transfer of data from the school district to Stanford University, how researchers actually access data is a separate process, right? So once the data are archived at Stanford University through the warehousing process, then the researchers can go through this secondary process in order to gain access to the data that they need. Please note that this process is obviously a significant oversimplification of the reality, although I'm going to try to kind of add some complexity to it. Right? The main purpose of this process map is to emphasize where the 5 safes framework might fit in. The first step of the process is really to design and create the project, where researchers and practitioners co-create a research project, including the specification of the research questions and research design. Right? And this is where it's not simply a linear process, right? There is a cycle of going around where practitioners bring their knowledge about the problems of practice that they face in their work, and researchers bring in the knowledge of the literature about what is known in the field, what might still need to be found out and researched. And it is that happy marriage of the practical considerations and some of the more theoretical and academic considerations that come together to create a meaningful and useful project. Second step of the process is the research application. Right? So San Francisco Unified School District, as with many school districts around the country in the United States, have a process through which research is proposed and approved. Right? So once researchers and practitioners have designed and created a project, they need to submit an application to the research office of the school district. And research team submits an application for research with an IRB approval, some documentation that shows that they have gone through the human subjects review and the institutional review board processes. And a couple of SAFE framework steps enter here. Right? One is SAFE project, by which there are 2 levels. There's a district level and the university level. Right? The ABC review is the district's internal review of the alignment with district's needs and priorities, benefits to the district, to staff and students, and the costs of carrying out research to students, staff, and the district. Right? So the ABC framework has been used by SFUSD for some time in order to really determine which projects might be worthwhile carrying out. On the other side is the IRB approval that researchers bring and submit with the research application, which obviously is an indication of a project having been vetted from the human subjects review perspective. The safe people aspect of this is that, of course, the human subjects and data security training certification is folded into the process of receiving an IRB approval. Right? So when the research team submits the research application with the IRB approval, it indicates that the research team has gone through the appropriate training, both in terms of human subjects and maintaining data security. And at this step, again, it's not simply a linear process. There is a cyclical element to it about what the desirable design for a research might be. Again, practitioners bring in the practical knowledge of what some appropriate and useful and equitable contrasts might be about which group of students should be compared, what might be feasible based on the operations, as well as researchers thinking about what some of the design constraints in order to carry out the research in a way that they would like to carry out as well. So there's a lot of discussion and conversation that happens at this stage as well. The third step of this process is the primary data collection, right, which is not always in existence, right? So some of the projects work simply with the administrative data that is archived, and the researchers do not need to engage in any primary data collection. But for projects that do, researchers and practitioners collaborate to implement and execute any primary data collection, such as administering surveys, treatments, and interventions. And of course, as with any research project, but more so in the school context, there's a lot of back and forth between the plan and the reality, right, where some of the original design that practitioners and researchers worked out together might not be feasible at the time of the data collection. So they need to kind of problem solve together and think about an alternative way to make the study happen and the primary data collection happen. So along with that, once primary data collection has concluded, then the secondary data transfer takes place, where researchers receive data from the warehouse at Stanford University. And it's not a straightforward step, right, where researchers and practitioners need to establish a shared understanding of the administrative data. So there's a lot of back and forth conversation that happens so that researchers know exactly what different descriptors and values mean and what where different variables and measures came from. And sometimes practitioners through this process also discover some issues that they might not have previously known about the data, right? So it's about establishing a shared understanding so that the researchers can use the secondary data, administrative data, in the most appropriate way possible. In this transfer process is the step of safe data, right? So SFUSD shares student-level data with Stanford University, but in the process, all the personally identifying information are either eliminated or scrambled. Right? The aspect that is scrambled is the student ID numbers. Right? So San Francisco Unified School District transfers the data with the student IDs embedded in the data, but the data manager at Stanford then scrambles so that the unique identifiers that are attached to each student are no longer the same ones that the district actually uses. Right? So we maintain some data privacy and security in that way. And safe settings-wise, Google Shared Drive and secure internal Stanford server are used in order to make the transfers as safe and secure as possible. Okay. And as I pointed out, the data discussion part again kind of adds to this cyclical nature of what is otherwise a linear process. Lastly, the sense-making and implications. Researchers conduct analysis using primary and secondary data, but really it's researchers and practitioners interpreting and validating results together and extracting appropriate actionable implications together. Right? So it is not done by just one side or the other side. Right? I've witnessed multiple occasions where practitioners were able to provide a broader context in which either the primary data collection or the administrative data capture happened, right? And those contexts importantly shaped how to make sense of the results coming out of the studies, right? So it's really this ongoing conversation about, what is the context, what is the unique context in which the data were captured, and given that, how to make sense of the findings. And this last stage is where safe outputs also happens as well. The district cares deeply about protecting student privacy. So to the extent possible, the district reviews any results and reports that are going to be shared broadly through publication or through conference presentations to see if there's any possibility of unintentionally revealing students' identities in the results. But even beyond that, the district also reviews for making sure that the district's context is accurately captured and shared in the findings that are going to be either presented or published, and considers whether the district should remain anonymous, unidentified in the research publications, or whether it could be identified in publications. So the project process, just to recap, is a process that researchers and practitioners walk through as they go through creating and all the way to completing a project. And in some ways, it is both linear overall, but at the same time, it is cyclical at each step as practitioners and researchers go back and forth in figuring out each step along the way and contributing their own respective knowledge into the process. Now I get to the last section of the talk today, which is about the lessons and insights for the field. I'll start with some of the metrics for success that the district has started to think about, highlight some of the conditions for success, and propose some considerations for prospective or developing partnerships. Right. So our metrics for success. It's worth including the caveat that the district has not yet developed a formal measurement model for this, so this is still very preliminary, but these will give you the idea that what some of the important outcomes that the partnership cares about are. The partnership really cares about three-pronged impact. Right? Of course, one is generating high-quality research that informs decisions by San Francisco Unified School District leaders and potentially other practitioners beyond, meaning other school districts or policymakers, but primarily really starting with the main district in question here. The second prong of impact is the potential for generalizability that influences the field of education. Right? So we have this marriage of practically usable knowledge on the one hand, combined with a broader generalizable finding that can shape the field of education, right, through various research presentations and conferences. And the third piece is also very important, which is about building the capacity on both the researcher side and the practitioner side to engage in partnership. Right? This partnership model that I have shared with you today is not something that comes automatically, which is partly the reason for this rise in popularity of research practice partnership model. It is something that needs to be continually worked on, where both sides need to develop the right mindset, develop some working together routines, and experience the process together of acknowledging both the academic expertise and the practical expertise that two sides bring. Stanford SFUSD partnership has been in place for now over 10 years, and it is one of the better known RPP partnerships around the country in the United States. And we can think about some conditions that have contributed to the success over time. Right? So one is the partnership mindset on both sides, which I've alluded to previously on the previous slide, about both the researchers and the practitioners really coming to the table with the right mindset of working together for mutual benefit, right? So it's not simply to serve the research needs, and it is also not simply to serve the practitioner's needs, but working together in order to mutually benefit from the process, and having that mindset together is an important condition for success. Resource commitment, of course, is very, very important, right? Having sufficient funding for staffing and equipment, right? And the continued support from the university side is an important element of making sure, creating that condition for success of the partnership. I should also note that as the RPP field grows, there is an emerging take on the funding element of partnership, where a foundation or grant-making agency would simultaneously fund both the research side and the practice side, as opposed to funding going to one or the other side and that entity then sharing the pot of money with the other partner. The third condition for success is the actual infrastructure with the equipment and the staffing, which we talk about a lot more in depth in the chapter. But of course, having the appropriate staffing and the equipment and the know-how that is necessary to run the data infrastructure has been a key condition for success. Lastly, the joint capacity to generate and use evidence, right? Ultimately, that is the goal, right? As I said at the very beginning, the goal of doing research is not simply to produce and generate research and evidence, but to be able to use it. And in order for that use to happen, it is really important for both the researchers and practitioners to have the capacity to generate and use, have the mindset of working together, so that ultimately the findings and the insights that come out of studies can in fact be used by the practitioners, as well as influence the broader field of education research. Through the 10 years of partnership, there are some lessons that the partnership and the staff have learned over time. So I would like to wrap up this talk by thinking about some of these broader issues that other partnerships might consider. So a couple of principles to think about. One is that conditions and contexts vary, right, from place to place and over time. So it's always important to keep in mind about how conditions and contexts might vary and change. And the second principle to think through and keep in mind is that design choices about data sharing arrangements tend to be path dependent, right? Meaning initial choices that one makes about data sharing certainly constrain future choices down the road. So with these two principles in mind, let me share some big picture thoughts. So we've been talking about the partnership between Stanford and SFUSD as one entity to another entity. Right? That was a diagram. Yes, there's complexity on both sides, within the district and within the university, but we've been focusing on Stanford and SFUSD. And this is what the diagram looks like, right? It's a one-to-one relationship. But the reality, of course, is more complex on both sides. Right? SFUSD has had a long history of partnering with multiple research institutions, which also rely on SFUSD administrative data. Right? So, for example, there are other research institutions, whether there are academic institutions like a different university, different departments, or non-academic entities that also engage in research and evaluation. And another complexity that has emerged over time is former Stanford researchers, right? So researchers that really started within the partnership that have moved on to other institutions continue to partner with SFUSD, which raises some important questions about how to structure the data sharing arrangement. And of course, we can think about some broader complications that make this picture more complex. On the Stanford side, of course, is also additional complexity, right? So Stanford University and the Graduate School of Education does not simply partner with San Francisco Unified School District. They also work with other school districts, for example, Oakland Unified School District as well. In addition, they might form other partnerships, right? So Stanford GSC has a second major partnership with a set of other districts in the surrounding area. So what this means is that whereas we've been really talking about one-to-one relationship between the district and the university, it really ends up being a combination of 1 to N, meaning the district has multiple research partners, and N to 1, relationship on Stanford side, where the university has multiple practice site partners. Right? So it's this network of partnerships that's really important to keep in mind in thinking about how to structure the data sharing arrangements. So one question might be the location choice for the data archive. Right? And one design principle that we could offer is to locate the data archive closest to the data knowledge. Going back to the point about how there are multiple forms of knowledge that's distributed across partnerships, those who hold the greatest knowledge about data coming from the practice side are the practice side partners. Right? So it would make the most sense for the data to be archived there, which will make it easier to go in and fix any errors that might have occurred in the data capturing process or data collection process, and to maintain an authoritative copy of analytical data that can then be shared out with multiple different research partners at different institutions. So a corollary of this design principle might be that to support locating the data archive closest to the data knowledge. Okay? That might mean staffing and supporting and financing equipment at the data source in order to locate the data archive as close to the source of knowledge, data knowledge as possible. Okay. A question that comes up from this design principle and way of thinking about how to structure the data archives might be that how might the field develop more adaptable data archive arrangements? Is it possible to create sort of a data warehouse that can potentially be picked up and moved? And what might that look like is an open question that we can raise. Another consideration for developing a prospective partnership is a staffing choice for data sharing. As I pointed out, having appropriate and well-informed staff to support the data sharing arrangement has been an important condition for success for the partnership and for the successful data sharing. A design principle here is to deeply embed data managers in their respective contexts. We cannot emphasize this enough that data managers really need to be fully embedded in the context so they know the source of data, they know the culture of data at the practice side institutions. Right? But similar corresponding principle can be applied on the research side as well, where data managers really need to be embedded in the research context, know the researchers, and can communicate effectively with researchers about data. Right? So a corollary of the design principle is to hire, locate, and train data managers accordingly. Right? And lastly, a question that comes out of this is how might the field train and grow this role? Right? So regardless of where data managers are actually located, whether on the practice side or on the research side or both, right? It seems like that the field hasn't quite caught up to train and produce enough of these data managers to engage in this type of partnership work, really, which involves really crossing boundaries, right, from practice side to the research side and vice versa. So the question is, how might the field train and grow this role? Third question and consideration to think about is the investment choice for building the data sharing arrangements. Here, a design principle might be to explicitly consider the upstream versus the downstream investments. And what I mean by upstream and downstream are the following. Upstream investments in the data context would be investing in the data ecosystem and data governance, right? So you can think about getting the data right up front, right? So they're getting the data correct and accurate, right? Whereas the downstream investments might be those that are focused on data transfer and storage. Right? So we can think about where along this data stream we put in the effort. And the corollary is that investments in the downstream work do not address the needs upstream. That is to say that even if you have a really smooth data transfer and storage arrangements worked out, that doesn't mean that quality data are stored. So partnerships and data sharing arrangements and institutions really need to think deeply about how to allocate the funds and investments so that they get the biggest bang for the buck. And again, the challenge here is to think about the long term. Right? It is certainly easier to focus on data transfer and storage, right? As a short-term win, right? Because those things are slightly easier, a lot easier to make happen, as opposed to focusing on data ecosystem and governance. Which leads me to the very last point, right? So creating a reliable and useful data infrastructure might really be a focus of data sharing arrangements. This might be usefully summarized as data worth sharing, right? Making sure that we have data that are worth sharing. Okay. Some design principles here are to ensure high quality data, to enable efficiency in collecting, organizing, maintaining, and sharing data. And lastly, facilitating the use of data by connecting implementation, the work that practitioners do, to impact, right, the results of the work and the outcomes of the work that the practitioners do across multiple levels. Right? All of the partner agencies on the practice side, I presume, would be complex organizations with multiple levels, with multiple teams doing different sorts of work, right? To move our knowledge forward, to have better information and knowledge about that can inform the work as well as contribute to the research field, we really need to be able to have a data system that can easily connect the work that practitioners do to their impact and make those connections and find interesting patterns to uncover in their day-to-day work. So this is really how we think about practice side and research side coming together. Stanford SFUSD partnership has been successful on multiple fronts in making this happen. We are continuously improving this arrangement over time. And we now look forward to your questions and comments, and thank you for your time.